This is the Wednesday, September 9th, 2020 special meeting of the County of Santa Clara's Unhoused Task Force meeting by virtual teleconference.
Could I just raise one point, Chair?
Yes.
Okay. This is Rod Sinks.
Oh, hi, Rod.
Hi, how are you?
Unhoused Task Force meeting of September. The Vice Chair from the Board of Supervisors, Ms. Susan Ellenberg. So this is the first time she and I are getting to chair and vice chair a team. So this is going to be fun for me and looking forward to it. We have a few members that are ex officio, myself, Supervisor Ellenberg, and Catherine Harras and Andy Jordan. So we'll do our roll call. I think we get included in the roll call. I just wanted you all to know we're not voting members. We're ex officio members. So with that, I'm going to ask the clerk to take the roll.
Member Jordan.
Here.
Member Harras.
Here.
Councilmember Bybee.
Here.
Mayor Scharf.
Here.
Councilmember Burton. Councilmember Dion Bracco. Councilmember Sinks.
Here.
Councilmember Dominguez. Councilmember Karina Dominguez. Vice Mayor Nunez.
I'm here.
Mayor Lawler. Mayor Liz Lawler.
Here.
Thank you. Mayor Constantine.
Present.
Councilmember Ramirez.
Here.
Councilmember Perales.
Here.
Councilmember Esparza. Councilmember Maya Esparza. Councilmember O'Neill.
Present.
Vice Mayor Smith.
Present.
Mayor Klein.
Present.
Member Clark. Member Lee Clark. Member Reeve. Member Lisa Reeve. Member Itari.
Here.
Member Baines.
Here.
Member Franklin. Member Sharp.
I'm sorry. Who was that?
Member Sabina Sharp.
No, your audio is breaking up so badly. It's very hard to hear you.
Yeah, and I apologize. I asked people to take themselves off mute to be ready for the roll call. But if you could all put yourselves on mute and just be prepared to unmute when it's your turn. And Mayor Sharp, that she was just asking if you were present, and he is.
The reason I said I was present earlier, but I think she may have called my name a second time. I'm not sure why.
Thank you.
We have a member, Samina Sharp.
Okay, I'm sorry. Yeah, your audio is breaking up so badly that it's hard to understand you.
My apologies. Member Samina Sharp. Is she present?
I don't believe so.
Member Stepanoff.
Here.
Member Cooper.
Here.
Member Pham.
Here.
Member King.
Here.
Member Sharp. I'm sorry, Member Shaw. Jerome Shaw. Vice Chairperson Ellenberg.
I'm here.
Chairperson Chavez.
Here. Thank you.
We have a quorum.
Excellent, excellent. And thanks, Nancy. What I'm going to do now is we're going to turn it over to council to go through the Brown Act. I'm going to ask folks to keep themselves on mute, but if you can, keep your windows open, that would be helpful for us. And also, just again, if you know how to use your little blue hand, great. And if you don't, wave wildly. You can also feel free to put put something in the chat if I don't actually know if we have that function. And then I'm going to ask the staff to make me a co-host. Thank you. Oh, I am. There you go. All right, Lisa Reeve, did you have a comment?
Yeah. Yes, my laptop quit and I had to sign in on my phone, and I just wanted to be counted in the roll call.
Great, we have you, Lisa Reeve. Thank you.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Mayor Pro Tem.
Hi, President Chavez. I didn't hear my name called, so I wanted to just note that I was here, present.
That's Mayor Yvonne Beltran. Great, thank you. All right, so we're going to turn this over to council. Who am I turning this over to exactly? Is it to you, Tony?
Yes, it is.
Great, thank you.
County Council Tony Lopresti. Thank you, Chairperson Chavez. I'm going to stop my video here and share my screen so you all can see a PowerPoint. Give me a second. Can everybody see that?
Yes. Yes.
Okay, great. So many laws have statements of intent and purpose, as I'm sure a lot of folks on this call know. And I like to start presentations about the Brown Act with the following noble statement of purpose in the law, which is the following. The people of this state do not yield their sovereignty to the agencies which serve them. The people in delegating authority do not give their public servants the right to decide what is good for the people to know and what is not good for them to know. The people insist on remaining informed so that they may retain control over the instruments they have created. Give me 1 second here. Okay. So what this means is that the Brown Act is a tool, and in fact, the principal tool in California that ensures transparency into local governmental affairs. And I want to focus on a particular excerpt of that purpose statement, which is that the people don't give their public servants the right to decide what is good for the people to know and what is not good for them to know. Often, I think public bodies get into trouble because they assume that a matter is so minor or so insignificant that it's not necessary to comply with the Brown Act. But that is really exactly what the Act is designed to prevent. It's not up to the public body to decide what is significant enough or major enough for the public to know. So it's important to strive for strict compliance, even when dealing with seemingly insignificant matters that might come up. Although the Act is designed to encourage robust transparency in public affairs, it also recognizes another really important interest, which is the government's need for candor and confidentiality in certain affairs, and the need to proceed efficiently. So there are certain exceptions and provisions in the Brown Act that allow public bodies to consider certain sensitive matters in private or to avoid getting bogged down in the process, which we'll talk about a bit as we go through this. Let's just touch real quick on who is subject to the Brown Act. It applies to meetings of local agencies and legislative bodies. And the term legislative body is defined very broadly to include a governing body or a local agency, a local body created by state or federal statute, any body of a local agency established by a resolution, like the task force, any standing committee of a legislative body with continuing subject matter jurisdiction, and temporary ad hoc committee that includes a member who is not a legislative body, not on a legislative body. The takeaway here is that the Unhoused task force and everybody on it are subject to the Brown Act. The Brown Act applies to all meetings of legislative bodies, and it's really critical to understand the broad scope of that term meeting. It's any congregation of a majority of the members of a legislative body to hear or to discuss or deliberate or take action on any item that's within the subject matter jurisdiction of the legislative body. A member refers to the individual appointed or elected to serve on a legislative body who has voting authority. And the Brown Act applies when a majority of those members meets to hear, discuss, deliberate, or take action. The important point, I think, here is that the body doesn't need to actually take action for a gathering to be defined as a meeting. Any coming together of a majority of the members to receive information or to deliberate or to discuss certain views would trigger the act. The Brown Act applies to meetings regarding issues that fall within the body's subject matter jurisdiction. So for the task force, the subject matter jurisdiction is defined by the Board of Supervisors' June 23rd resolution establishing the task force, which states that the focus is identifying and contributing to feasible strategies to address homelessness, including transitional and short-term housing solutions. So I think the take-home point here is that's a very broad scope, and to the extent there's any doubt regarding whether a matter falls within the subject matter jurisdiction of the task force, it's best to err on the side of caution and to assume that the act applies. Let's just go quickly through the types of meetings. I think most of us can remember back in the olden days when we had face-to-face meetings in person, and those were certainly meetings, and those included things like retreats and workshops and study sessions and fact-finding tours and that sort of thing. Particularly relevant now, any member who joins a body by video teleconferencing is part of the meeting, and of course, a video teleconferenced meeting is a meeting under the Brown Act. The main issue that I really want to focus your attention on here is what are referred to as serial meetings, which is oftentimes where folks get into trouble on the Brown Act. A series of communications of any kind, directly or through intermediaries, to discuss, deliberate, or take action on any item of business within the subject matter jurisdiction of the legislative body is a meeting that is subject to the act. So communications that might take place through phone calls or emails or texts or live chat or even Snapchat, for that matter, are communications. And these communications might happen in what is known as a chain fashion or a hub and spoke fashion. A chain meeting occurs when member A of the task force, say, communicates with member B, and then member B communicates with member C until there's a majority of the legislative body that's been involved. And so, you know, the best way to prevent that kind of chain meeting is for members to avoid exchanging information on non-public, non-noticed setting, in a non-public, non-noticed setting, but you do need to be careful about how that communication is passed. And then, of course, a hub and spoke meeting occurs when member A communicates with member B, and then member A communicates with member C, so on and so forth, until you get to a majority of the legislative body being involved. You know, you also have to be very careful about intermediaries who can facilitate serial meetings. So for example, a staff member can act as the hub in a hub and spoke meeting, where they're speaking with member A on a topic, then member B on a topic, et cetera, until a majority of the legislative body has been involved. One thing to be particularly careful about are emails. Email exchanges among a majority of members of a body are prohibited under the Brown Act. And it doesn't matter if those emails are later made public. So the way that this really becomes a problem most often is if a member of the public emails the entire task force, and then a member of the task force hits reply all to answer, that email constitutes a meeting that has the potential to violate the Brown Act. So be very careful of that reply all button. Writings, including emails and text messages that are sent or received on personal electronic devices or personal accounts, but relate in some substantive way to the conduct of the business of the task force, qualify as public records under the California Public Records Act. And the recommendation from County Council is that committee members, the task force members, establish a separate email account for any task force business to avoid any commingling with personal account emails, or just to avoid using your personal emails for the business associated with the task force. Just a few examples to clarify of where the Brown Act doesn't apply. It's not listed here, but just to be clear, any individual contacts or conversations between a member of a legislative body and any other person, so long as it doesn't constitute a serial meeting, is not covered by the Brown Act. And attendance of a majority of the body at a conference or a gathering that's open to the public, at a noticed public meeting of other local agencies, at a purely social or ceremonial occasion, those kinds of meetings fall outside of the Brown Act, provided that a majority of the task force doesn't discuss specific matters of business related to the subject matter of the legislative body they sit on, other than as part of the regularly scheduled program for those kinds of events. Give me 1 second here. Just a quick note on accessibility. You know, a meeting needs to be held in a facility, or in this case, in a way that allows for accessibility to disabled persons. There needs to be a notation on the agenda that shows how to quickly access those services. And there needs to be a noticed agenda. The Brown Act requires that the agenda be posted in a location that's freely accessible to members of the public 24 hours a day during the 72-hour period prior to the meeting. And the county practice is to post an agenda 6 days in advance of a regular meeting. I'm going to skip through. You can take a look at the required content on the agenda. Give me 1 second here. Generally, a legislative body may not take any action or discuss any item not appearing on the posted agenda. There are some limited exceptions, which you see listed here. Any comments under these exceptions really need to be brief. The exceptions don't allow for a wide-ranging or meaningful, substantial discussion on non-agenda items. They're primarily designed to allow members of the legislative body to respond to public comments or to request additional information or schedule an item for discussion at a future meeting in a manner that complies with the Brown Act. Statements under these exceptions do not provide a basis for discussion or debate. So if a member makes a referral or requests that an item be agendized for discussion at a future meeting, the other members can't proceed to debate the underlying subject without violating the act. And that discussion really must be held at a future meeting after the item has been noticed on an agenda. So the rule of thumb is to provide the minimum necessary information in order to establish clarity on what work should be done prior to the next meeting and what should be agendized at that next meeting. A quick note on public participation. Every member of the public has the right to record and broadcast the proceedings of an open meeting with an audio or video recorder, provided that it doesn't disturb the meeting. I'm sorry, it looks like my slides might be a little confused in their order here. Any material that is a public record prepared by staff and that's distributed during a public meeting has to be made available for public inspection at that meeting. Any writing that's not prepared by the agency or a member of the legislative body that's distributed during a public meeting has to be made available for public inspection after the meeting. A legislative body may not take action by secret ballot. As a reminder, a quorum of a legislative body has to be present to take actions. Here we have a quorum, we have 28 members, if I'm not mistaken, so we have a quorum of 15. A legislative body must publicly report any action taken and the vote for abstention of each member present for the action, as well as any recusals for the item and required recusal information. So it's not sufficient to state just 12 in favor and 9 opposed. There actually has to be an identification of who is in favor and who is in favor and who's opposed. And a member who needs to recuse himself or herself is not counted toward the quorum for the item's vote. A member who abstains, on the other hand, is counted. And just finally, a quick word on penalties and remedies. Violations are punishable by fine and imprisonment, and the district attorney or any interested individual can file a civil lawsuit to invalidate an action taken or to prevent an action that will be taken in violation of the Brown Act. That concludes my presentation. I know it's a lot of information. Certainly you can reach out to myself and the County Council office with any questions, and we'd be happy to help work through any questions you have. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tony. I wanted to welcome Karina Dominguez, Maya Sparza, Lee Clark, and Jerome Shaw. And most of them came at the beginning of this presentation, and I'm sharing that to make sure that the clerk is able to note that. What I'd like to do now is to see if there are any questions from any of our panelists, our members of the committee, about the Brown Act. And let me just say, it sounds more complicated than it is. It just means we can't talk to too many people, so we make a majority before we talk in the public, is the kind of big takeaway. Are there any questions? All right, seeing none, I'm going to go on, and I have no public speakers on this item, so I'm going to go on to items 3. And let me just say that this is really going to be the bulk of the presentation tonight. And what we're doing is we're getting a very in-depth report about what we know about the community that's in need of housing, the work that's going on now, and this is a very in detail report. I'm going to make sure that the slide presentations are sent out to everybody. You're going to see the slide presentation live, but that we'll make sure this material gets to you. I'm going to ask that we hold questions, and this will be difficult, but I want to hold them till the end of the presentation. So please take notes if you need to. But the reason we're doing that is your question may be answered in a couple slides and lead to a new question. And I want to be super respectful of everybody's time. But this is an opportunity. There's no question that's dumb. We just want to give everybody a chance to hear all the information first. Then we're going to brainstorm a little bit about the work plan. We'll get a draft of that work plan out to all of you by Monday latest, so that you have a chance to give us feedback. You're not going to send that feedback to me. We'll have it sent to, anyway, I'll work with the county council to make sure we can get it sent back to the right person. And then the last item under here is to make sure that everybody looks at the calendar, because we'll be voting on the calendar, and we'll be voting on item 3 to receive the report. We're not going to vote on item B because we're not approving the task force work plan. We're just getting feedback on it, and then we're going to approve the calendar. So with that, I'm going to turn this over, I think, to Hillary. Is that right?
Yes, thank you.
Excellent. Welcome.
Thank you. We also have Consuelo Hernandez, the director of the Office of Supportive Housing, and Reagan Henninger, who is the deputy director of the housing department with the city of San Jose. And I'll be giving the bulk of the presentation, but they are here to answer questions. My name is Hillary Baroga. I'm a program manager with the Office of Supportive Housing and have been doing this work for most of my career. So I really appreciate the opportunity to speak with you all and the time that you're putting into the Unhoused Task Force. Tonight, we'll give an overview of homelessness in Santa Clara County, the work of the supportive housing system, a brief overview of the community plan to end homelessness, and we will give your first glance at the framework matrix that you can use to inform yourselves and make decisions. And each of the slides should have a slide number on it. So if you do have questions and you want to reference a slide number, please feel free to look in the lower right-hand corner. In Santa Clara County, and as required by federal law, we do a biennial point in time count or homeless census. And the point in time count is conducted during the last week of January in odd numbered years. The last point in time count was conducted in 2019, January, and on the given night, we found 9,706 individuals who were homeless within the county. And of that, about a quarter of the people were sheltered and 3/4 were unsheltered. That count was a 31% increase from the prior count in 2017. This table shows by city the number of people enumerated in each city, both sheltered and unsheltered, and comparing the 2017 numbers to the 2019 numbers. I'll give you a second to look for your city. So our biennial point in time count tells us a lot of information. In addition to doing a numeric count, we also do a survey of a selection of the population, a sample of the population. But we are very curious folks and love data. And so in 2015, the county and our partner Destination Home commissioned a study on the cost of homelessness in Silicon Valley. The report from the study was called Home Not Found, and it was the largest and most comprehensive cost study of homelessness in the country. We looked at data over several administrative databases, including our homeless management information system, the county's healthcare system records, and the criminal justice system records. And we looked at the records of over 100,000 people within Santa Clara County over a 6-year period. And the study found that in a year, the county alone spends about $520 million per year providing services for the people who were studied. And this next slide shows that the most costly services and the highest costs were provided to about 10% of the people. So the top 10th decile of folks incurred 54% of the public cost. So we'll take a little bit of a look at information on some of the subpopulations on homelessness, the subpopulations within homelessness. We have a lot of detailed information available to us on all of these subpopulations and more, and our office is happy to provide additional information as the task force sees fit. So this is an overview of some of the various subpopulations that we will take a look at. As Supervisor Chavez mentioned, we will send this out so that if the font is too tiny, you can zoom in. So tonight we will look at the various subpopulations. This chart shows the number of people who entered our system seeking assistance, we have what we call the coordinated assessment system. And in that system, folks seeking assistance take a survey with a service provider, and it helps us determine what the right housing intervention for their long-term permanent housing maintenance might be. The data here on this chart is for fiscal year 1920, so from July 1st, 2019 through June 30th, 2020. And during that time, 6,346 households sought assistance from the system, and then it shows each subpopulation in the various colored bars. I should note here that there may be people in subpopulations that overlap, so you cannot add these up and get 100%. For example, you might have a veteran who also has mental health issues, or a woman who also has a foster care background. As I mentioned, when somebody does the survey with us, the VI SPDAT, in case you like funny acronyms, the survey gives us an indicator of the type of housing intervention that someone might need. So starting on the right, permanent supportive housing is the highest level of need and intensity of service. Permanent supportive housing is intensive case management services combined with a deep, ongoing, not time-limited subsidy, rental subsidy. And so that's one of the major permanent housing interventions in the supportive housing system. The section in the middle indicates the need for rapid rehousing. Rapid rehousing is time limited and provides also a high level of case management, but a time limited rental subsidy. And usually the best practice programs do what's called a declining subsidy. So they may provide as much as the full rent at the beginning of the program, but over time wean folks off so that the household being served is paying most of their rent at the end of the program, or not requiring any financial assistance for rent at all, and just receiving services related to housing stability. The typical maximum time in a rapid rehousing program is about 2 years. And then the section on the left, the minimal range, are folks whose needs are low enough that with a minimal amount of support, they probably can self-resolve homelessness. They probably don't need, in relation to others, and long-term ongoing subsidy from a service need perspective. That's not to say that folks who are low income and extremely low income in our area don't need assistance with the ongoing cost of housing, but the service need is really one of the focuses here. And so this, for each of the charts, shows the percentage of people who present in each subpopulation needing each type of intervention. So one of the populations that we are taking a look at is youth and young adults. We define youth as under the age of 18 and young adults as 18 to 25-year-olds. In each of the subsequent subpopulation charts, on the left, you'll see the percentage of folks who need the different type of housing interventions that we saw on the last slide, but all in one for the subpopulation, so it's easier to read. And then we've presented a little bit of interesting information about the subpopulation. One of the unique characteristics that we found interesting about youth and young adults is that 42% of youth and young adults reported an experience in the foster care system, compared to 19% of total survey respondents in our biennial homeless survey. Another interesting data point is that 30% of youth and young adult survey respondents identified as LGBTQ+, compared to 10% of adult respondents. And youth who self-identify as LGBTQ+ and score in the permanent supportive housing range at a rate of 65%, which is significantly higher than the 43% of youth and young adults overall who present needing permanent supportive housing. Another population we took a look at is the history of foster care. And in our 2019 point in time count survey, 42% of youth and young adults reported an experience in the foster care system. That's down a little bit from the prior survey where 45% of young adults reported an experience in the foster care system. We are also looking at families with children, and this slide shows both the number of children per household. So in the fiscal year 18-19, we had 623 households with children and almost 1,300 children in those households, ranging in size from 1 child per household to 6 children per household. So we had 9 households with 6 children. We also took a look at the age ranges, and 37% of children in the families that year were between 5 and 10 years of age. We also had 27% who were under 5. Another interesting thing to note with regard to families with children and how we see them show up in the supportive housing system is that families find a way more than anyone else to double up or remain under the radar, if you will. And so in addition to the point in time count, which counts literal homelessness, so people who are sleeping on the streets or in shelters, in vehicles or other places not meant for human habitation, we also look at school district data, and school districts have a liaison in each school district focused on kids who are homeless and their families. And their data in the 2018-19 school year showed that 2,739 families were homeless at some point in Santa Clara County. Another subpopulation to consider are women, and women have several interesting characteristics, including that they enroll at higher rates in lower intensity programs, and that you can also see, though, that women have high rates of needing permanent supportive housing. Women who are homeless often have kids. 80% of households who had at least 1 kid under the age of 5 had a female head of household, and more than half of homeless single moms have 2 or more kids. Women who seek assistance are younger compared to men seeking assistance. And while women are 33% of the homeless population, they're only 27% of the clients at adult shelters. And homeless women report higher rates of fleeing or having a history of intimate partner violence. In terms of survivors of intimate partner violence, folks who present to us also have higher rates of needing permanent supportive housing. And one of the things to note, particularly as it relates to the work of this task force, is that the number of shelter beds and other interventions dedicated specifically to people who are fleeing intimate partner violence is very low. So you can see that there are fewer than 100 shelter, transitional housing, and rapid rehousing spots specifically dedicated to intimate partner violence throughout our system. The next population is LGBTQ plus, and the 2017 homeless census and survey identified about a third of respondents as identifying as LGBTQ plus, compared to 4% of the county's general population identifying as LGBTQ plus. Another thing that I thought was interesting to note were the age ranges, where our data shows that younger people are, the people who are identifying as LGBTQ plus are more likely to be younger. We also took a look at seniors, and there are 2 bars on each chart here. The bar on the left shows seniors who are ages 55 to 64, and the bar on the right shows seniors who are 65 and older. The chart on the right shows the percentage of seniors who enrolled in programs who have disabilities. So taking a look at mental health, substance use, physical or developmental disabilities. We took a look at veterans. Veterans also have higher rates of disabilities and tend to be older. So almost 60% of veterans homeless veterans are over the age of 55. This subpopulation slide is looking at single adults who are not veterans and who are over the age of 25. And so you can see that half of this subpopulation is between 45 and 64 years old, also with higher rates of disabilities. So that's our subpopulation speed race. And we, again, if you are interested in more information about any particular subpopulation, we're happy to provide it. Now we'll take a look at the current supportive housing system and what exists now. So this is our supportive housing system map, and it includes components of the system as well as relationships about how people get connected to various resources. So outreach services are typically out on the streets. They serve as an access point for folks who are unsheltered and unhoused. And our outreach providers do a variety of things out in the world. They help people get connected to the coordinated assessment system. They help people get connected to shelter beds. They provide basic needs supplies. They're often the relationship builders when they do their jobs really well. The system also includes emergency shelter as a component, and that emergency shelter box includes interim housing programs and tiny house communities and anything that is intended to be a short-term stay. Looking to the far bottom left is the component of homelessness prevention in the system. Homelessness prevention, as you'll see when we look at the framework, is really instrumental and effective in the system. Once somebody becomes unhoused, it's really difficult to get somebody housed again. But if we can maintain somebody in their existing housing unit, we save them and the system a lot of unnecessary work, and it's really just the best thing that we can do for folks. In terms of accessing what we call our permanent housing interventions, which are the 3 boxes on the right side of the slide, we have, as I mentioned before, a coordinated assessment system. It's a front door to housing resources, and people can access the coordinated assessment system through about 60 different community-based organizations throughout the county. Any organization participating in our homeless management information system, and any victim service provider for people who are fleeing domestic violence or intimate partner violence is a front door to the coordinated assessment system. And the coordinated assessment system matches people to the most appropriate housing opportunity available for their need. So I discussed permanent supportive housing and rapid rehousing a little bit earlier. Transitional housing is a temporary housing program based in a site that isn't intended to be somebody's permanent residence. But it provides structure and stability and is best used for certain populations, like veterans, youth, who need and want more structure to learn how to do all the adulting that eventually they have to do. And folks who are seeking a structured substance abuse recovery home are also good candidates for for transitional housing. And particularly our permanent supportive housing efforts and our rapid rehousing efforts would not be as far along as they were without our efforts at developing affordable and supportive housing for extremely low income households. One of the biggest sources the county uses to do that is the 2016 Measure A Affordable Housing Bond. We're in year 3 of implementation and have committed $375 million to multifamily housing developments over 7 cities. It's 27 housing units, a combination of new construction and renovation. And in addition, with Measure A, with the housing bond, we have implemented a $25 million first-time home buyer program. The chart on the right on this slide shows the projected time frame for the opening of each of these units. And so while the development of more housing is essential, it also takes a while. And that's why we need your thoughts and efforts and actions to increase emergency solutions. This chart shows the supportive housing system capacity by the different program types. And what we mean by capacity is the number of households that we can serve on any given night, unless in most of these program types. The rapid rehousing and homelessness prevention number is the number of households we believe we can serve annually based on the financial capacity that we have, because the capacity for those programs isn't necessarily a bed, it's how many dollars do we have and how far can we stretch them. Again, these numbers are household numbers. And so a couple of things to note here. One is that the emergency shelter number, for example, as a household number, we do have family shelters. And so the number of people who can be served in our emergency shelter system each night is over 2,000 people. Another thing to note here is that this 1,062 household units includes the almost 800 hotel rooms that we have stood up since COVID started, and includes and also factors in the need to reduce shelter capacity due to allowing social distancing. So this 1,062 is a current number. I will say here that one of the things that as we think about the emergency services work and when COVID comes to an end is how will our community continue to sustain the shelter capacity and the funding required to support motel rooms. So that's something that you all as a task force might think about. We are working on phasing people out of hotel rooms into interim housing. So the city of San Jose is in development on 3 emergency interim housing developments, totaling 300 units of interim housing. So interim housing is emergency shelter for people who are moving into a permanent housing unit with a permanent supportive housing subsidy or a rapid rehousing subsidy, but haven't found their unit yet, or the unit is still under construction. So that's the interim housing programs, and we're going to be doing some phasing out over the next few months. So in addition to capacity, we wanted to show you where people are successful in moving to permanent housing. So of households who exited programs, so the time in their program was up or they achieved their goals and it was time for them to move on, how many of those households exited to a permanent housing destination? In our rapid rehousing programs, we have a pretty decent success rate of 74%. Transitional housing is lower at 41%. And in homelessness prevention, people who receive homelessness prevention services, 95% have remained stably housed while receiving those services. Our emergency shelter exit rate to permanent housing is 24%. And that's lower for a variety of reasons. One is that emergency shelters are different in terms of how their service model is and the level of case management services offered and the support that they offer to folks moving out of housing. Another is that emergency shelter doesn't take into account the level of need of the person in the long term. And so if somebody needs a permanent subsidy and intensive support services for the ongoing foreseeable future, but they have not yet been connected to a permanent supportive housing resource, then if they leave an emergency shelter, they would go to a destination that isn't permanent housing. And when we say permanent housing destination, that includes things like renting their own apartment with or without a subsidy. It includes moving in with family or friends who will allow them to stay on an ongoing basis with no time limitations. Things that aren't included in permanent housing destinations are things like staying with family or friends who have given them a time limit, or going back to the streets, or jail, or some sort of hospitalization. Those sorts of things are not considered permanent housing destinations. In addition to looking at where people go once they exit a program, we also look at, are people staying housed? And the way that we can look at that through our data is looking at what percentage of people have returned to seek homeless services after exit. We look at this at the 6 month after exit point, the 1 year after exit, and 2 years after exit. So I have the 1 year data here for you. So what this is telling you is that of the 24% of households who exited emergency shelter, 24% of those to a permanent housing destination, 24% of the 24% came back to the supportive housing system seeking homeless services within a year after their exit. You can see that in the permanent housing interventions, most of the interventions have lower rates of return. For people who leave a permanent supportive housing program, only 2% return after a year, 10% of rapid rehousing households, 23% of transitional housing, and for folks who received homelessness prevention services, only 6% return after a year. We also wanted to show you the county's investments in the supportive housing system. And this shows the actual data for fiscal year 1920. It doesn't include special revenue funds like the housing bond or our CDBG program. So this is some, but not all, of the county's investments. And I've broken this information out by system coordination and administration. This is the work that we do on a variety of different levels, including coordinating the supportive housing system, implementing the work of the continuum of care and staffing the continuum of care. I will explain what that is in just a couple slides. And submitting the county's, the continuum of care's application for HUD Continuum of Care program funds, which are a little over $20 million of funding each year. Crisis response includes emergency shelters, cold weather shelters, interim housing, outreach services, and the like. Homelessness prevention, rapid rehousing, permanent supportive housing, we've talked about what those are. Housing and community development includes the staff to coordinate and oversee all of the work that we do with developers and overseeing the bond funds. And the other category includes things that didn't fit neatly into one of those categories. So we do a variety of things, like we have an employment initiative that doesn't fit specifically into any of these categories, or this includes the house sharing program that we were running and a variety of other services. Much of this funding is contracted out. So while we do have staff in the Office of Supportive Housing of, I think it's a little over 100 FTE, we do contract out most of the work to community-based organizations. In addition to all of that, the supportive housing system includes work related to encampments and people who are unsheltered. Particularly this year, there's been yeoman's work in distributing personal protective equipment, placing toilets and hand washing stations, mobile showers, an effort with encampments to do cleanup versus abatement. Many of the cities have been doing this, and the county, all in partnership together. And then there are things that we do together, like outreach coordination. So there are probably about half a dozen teams of folks who go out and do outreach with different purposes throughout our community. There are teams with specific geographic focus. There are teams with certain specialties, like the Valley Homeless Healthcare Program or the behavioral health outreach teams and mobile crisis teams. And one of the important things that is done within the Office of Supportive Housing is to coordinate outreach, and in partnership with all of our outreach providers and funders, is to coordinate the outreach so that we are not duplicating efforts in terms of the geography covered or the specialized services offered, so that we're stronger together. And then one of the newer interventions that we are implementing as a community is an intervention called housing problem solving. And really that is what it sounds like. It's common sense conversations with access to a little bit of financial assistance to help people figure out if they have thought through every possibility for how to solve their current housing crisis. Housing problem solving isn't intensive ongoing case management. It's really hyper-focused on the housing problem at hand and can we solve that problem. And so that's a newer intervention that we're working on implementing as well. I want to spend a few minutes talking about the community plan to end homelessness. Some of your jurisdictions may have already gotten a community plan presentation and a request to endorse the community plan. If you have not yet, we will be with you at some point in the near future. But the community plan to end homelessness for 2020 to 2025 was recently published. The plan was put forward by and coordinated by the Santa Clara County Continuum of Care. The Continuum of Care, or COC, is a broad group of stakeholders, and you can see the types of stakeholders in the bubbles connected to the center. And the goal of the COC is to ensure community-wide implementation of our efforts and programmatic and systematic effectiveness. And so the community plan to end homelessness was developed by the community and people with lived experience, and we bureaucrats and our CBO and nonprofit stakeholders, members of philanthropy, and members of the private sector. This is our second community plan to end homelessness. It's an update to the original plan, if you will. And from 2015 to 2019, we made an amazing amount of progress in helping homelessness. We helped almost 9,000 households and 14,000 people resolve homelessness. We doubled the number of supportive housing, permanent housing units in the county, as well as our temporary and emergency housing capacity. Our homelessness prevention system was launched and can now serve about 1,000 households annually. That number has increased in part due to the emergency COVID funding that's come around. And in addition, we've had a very successful campaign for homeless veterans that's housed 1,600 veterans and engaged 800 private landlords in these efforts. And as you saw on an earlier slide, voters approved in 2016 $950 million to develop affordable housing throughout the community. And another $100 million has been raised in private contributions to support that implementation. So we've done so much work and made an amazing amount of progress, and yet homelessness continues to grow. For every household that we are able to get housed, 2 or 3 more are experiencing homelessness for the first time in our community. And there are a few reasons why we think that is. And they are systemic factors. One is that we have a growing wealth gap. So the earned income for full-time wage and salary workers for the 10th and 20th percentile of folks has decreased by 10 or 12%, where for the 80th and 90th percentile of income earners, it has increased by 10 to 12%. We also have a shortage of affordable homes. So this chart shows that in the San Jose metropolitan area for 2018, we had fewer than the required number of units for every level of below area median income that existed here. And we can also see from our data that racial disparities exist in homelessness in our community. This chart shows that for predominantly for Black and African Americans and American Indian and Alaskan Natives and folks who are Hispanic or Latinx. Every single one of those racial and ethnic groups in the homelessness population exceeded significantly the percentage of folks in the general population in our community. And so the community plan to end homelessness addresses those things. This slide shows the guiding values that went into the plan and how the plan came together. The plan is built on three core strategies. The first strategy is to address the root causes of homelessness through system and policy change. And we have some underlying strategies for each of these that I'll cover as well. And with each of these core strategies, the steering committee for the community plan identified entities within our community to take a leadership role in implementing that strategy. And so addressing the root causes of homelessness through systemic and policy change will be the work of Destination Home and the county. It's the work of the whole community, but driving the work will be led by the county and Destination Home. Strategy 2 is relating to the existing supportive housing system. And the strategy is to expand homelessness prevention and housing programs to meet the need. And so the lead agency on that strategy is the county. And then strategy 3 is to improve the quality of life for unsheltered individuals and create healthy neighborhoods for all. Strategy 3 is the strategy that relates to your work as the Unhoused Task Force. And the lead entity on strategy 3 is the City of San Jose, and in partnership with the other cities with support from the county. So let's look at each of the strategies quickly. The strategies here are really focused on what are the root causes of homelessness. So how do we ensure that people accessing safety net services have the support they need to obtain and maintain housing? How do we make sure that folks involved in criminal justice don't become homeless? How do we create conditions so that we can develop enough affordable housing? How do we protect residents from eviction, displacement, and housing discrimination? How do we ensure that folks have access to living wage employment? And how do we expand public and private support for ending and preventing homelessness? The second strategy, the overarching strategy, is to expand programs. And this, again, is related to the existing supportive housing system and the permanent housing interventions primarily. So in this strategy, we want to increase the capacity of supportive housing programs for people experiencing homelessness. We want to provide a broad range of supports to prevent homelessness. And we want to make sure that our supportive housing system is state of the art. And this includes making sure that the voices of people who have lived experience are the center of policy and program design for decision making about the supportive housing system. And we want to invest in the people who do the work. And as I've said, and probably will say more times than you want me to say it, strategy 3 is your strategy. We are hoping that the work of this committee, this task force, can help drive the work plan for strategy 3 for the community plan. And strategy 3 is about improving quality of life for the unhoused people in our community. So the strategies in this, the underlying strategies in this plan are to develop to double the number of year-round temporary housing beds and offer a variety of welcoming temporary housing options throughout the community, to increase the work that we're doing for unhoused folks so that the options match the needs of the people. That includes street outreach, hygiene services, transportation, and more. We want to increase mental health and substance use services. We want to engage a cross-sector of community partners in this work. And we want to ensure that community spaces are safe and welcoming for housed and unhoused residents. And we have set some pretty aggressive targets with this community plan. We, by 2025, want to achieve a 30% reduction in the annual inflow of people becoming homeless. That is the number of people who present to the system seeking homeless services who haven't come to us before. We also want to house 20,000 people in the next 5 years. We want to expand the homelessness prevention system so that we can serve 2,500 people per year. We want to double our temporary housing and shelter capacity to reduce the number of people sleeping outside. And we want to address the racial inequities that are present among unhoused people and track our progress toward reducing those disparities. And we've done a lot of work even in the 8 months that we've had so far. This year, voters in San Jose approved Measure E, which will allow millions of dollars annually to help fund new affordable housing. Our homelessness prevention system has distributed more than $15 million in direct financial assistance, serving about 7,000 families throughout Santa Clara County. So much effort has been put into helping unhoused people stay safe during the pandemic. So 1,900 households have used congregate and non-congregate shelter. 50,000 pieces of personal protective equipment have gone out, and mobile showers and sanitation services for individuals living in encampments or other outdoor locations have been deployed within the community. Even with a global pandemic, we have helped 981 homeless households into permanent housing since March 1st, and that's as of August 20th. So I would imagine we have helped a few more folks into housing since then. And we have 4 temporary housing programs underway, 3 under development by the city of San Jose and 1 by the county, that will serve about 400 people when they are built. So that is the bulk of the overview of the supportive housing system. This next section, I'd like to go over the framework of information that's provided, and we will send out, the matrix that goes along with this are on subsequent slides. So you'll see it, but we'll also send out a version that you can use. I will also note that this framework is a work in progress, and over the next couple of weeks, we will be tightening up all the information and adding information to what you're about to see. And the framework looks at 6 different data points for a variety of program types. We'll talk about the program types in a minute, but I wanted to go through each of the data points reflected on the framework so that you understand what you're looking at when you're looking at it. And the goal in doing this is to make sure that everyone has the opportunity to understand all that goes into developing shelters or permanent housing at a high level because it's very complicated. So the 6 data points start with one-time startup costs per household. This includes everything from what it would take to acquire land, purchase land, acquire and rehab a building, enter into a lease for a building and rehab that and get it ready. This considers all of the development costs and significant startup costs for things like tiny house communities and tiny house communities on wheels. It includes making sure that the site has the infrastructure in place to start that program. This could also include the purchase of tiny homes or trailers, things like that. In safe parking programs, for example, we have some safe parking programs that in order to start, they, like we have a safe parking program at the Shoreline Amphitheater that used to be landfill. And so one of the things that we have to do to just extra ensure that people are safe is provide methane detectors to each RV parked at the lot. So startup costs would go in there. The second category of information is the development time frame. And for each program type, we've provided a range that generally it would take to start a project once a site has been identified, from concept to opening the doors. The third category, this purple leaf, are the annual operating costs per household. This includes the cost of providing supportive services, but it also includes the things that keep the roof and the lights on. So paying the electricity, or paying the lease if it's in a lease structure, or paying the water bill, staff and security, all those sorts of things, the food service costs, whatever it takes for that type of housing intervention to operate on an annual basis. So the ongoing costs would be included in there. In the section where we look at permanent housing interventions, the costs of rental subsidies are also factored into that purple category, and the annual operating costs category, as well as other financial assistance like deposits or homelessness prevention. The second row, starting at the left, is the rate of exit to permanent housing. And this is, we looked at a slide that reflects this before. So what percentage of people exit that housing intervention to a permanent housing destination? The orange leaf, or the fifth data point, is also a statistic we looked at earlier, which is the rate of maintaining permanent housing, or the way that it's looked at on the matrix is the rate at which people return to homelessness after a year. And then this, I think, is the category that needs the most population in the matrix, but it's things that we need to think about if we're going to scale this program type. And it could be everything from, is this unit going to be accessible for the people we intend to serve? Or what type of land do we need to consider having? Does it need to be near public transit? Do we need to think about the long-term or short-term uses of that land? So this is sort of a catch-all for everything we need to think about if we want to do a lot of that intervention. So that's the overview of the data points within the matrix. And then we are looking at the program types in two categories: temporary housing interventions, so all of our shelters, tiny home communities, safe parking, and then our permanent housing interventions, which we in the supportive housing system think about the interventions that are designed to get people housed and keep them housed, versus the temporary housing interventions, which are mostly intended to provide some immediate relief to the unhoused situation. We have in the temporary housing interventions talked about congregate shelter, so shelters that are more dorm style settings, and non-congregate shelter, which are settings where people have typically their own room or space in whatever form it is. And then in the bottom three categories, the micro homes are probably the smallest that we would offer, so around the 100 square foot range. Structures on wheels, which have their own considerations, and in terms of being able to implement those sorts of things, are governed differently by we legislators, and then other structures like shipping containers or tough sheds that are probably around the 150 square feet to 300 square foot range, depending. So I'll take a few minutes now to go through the framework as it's populated at this point, and as I mentioned, we'll continue to populate it if Supervisor Chavez, that works for you.
Thanks. If you could just give one highlight, just to explain how you're looking at this, would be great.
Sure.
It's a lot of good information.
Yeah, and it's a lot of meaty information, so I imagine you all will want to digest it. I think that this first slide with congregate shelters and non-congregate shelters is a good example. So the program type is in the first column, and then each column are the 6 data points that we'll look at. So we took a look at one-time startup costs per household. And these two, we've partnered together because with either congregate shelter or non-congregate shelter, we could approach this in a couple of ways. We could purchase a site, a building, a facility, and acquire it, rehab it, outfit it for this congregate shelter purpose, or a non-congregate shelter purpose. Like we could purchase a motel and create a new non-congregate shelter purpose. We are in the process of opening a non-congregate shelter in a former nursing home, for example. And that model we are leasing from the property owner. So that's another option. If there were a suitable facility, it could be leased. And so the one-time startup costs between congregate shelter and non-congregate shelter here are somewhat interchangeable. So so for congregate shelters, if we assume that the cost to purchase a building for 150 individuals to do congregate shelter was $15 million, that included the acquisition, the rehab, all the furniture required and such, the cost would be $100,000 per household to start up for that facility. Doing something like that from the beginning, once a site was identified, could take 2 to 5 years. And that time frame would include all of the community work to make sure that the neighborhood and the people who lived already in the neighborhood understood the program that was trying to go in, and do the public outreach that we need to do. It assumes time to put the financing together and purchase the facility and do the rehab and all the planning work that goes into it. And within that time, we'd also need to identify an operator and a service model and the funding to operate it. So the annual operating costs per household, we range from $16,000 to $32,000 per household. There are so many variables that impact the cost. It would include, things include household size and composition. Are there lease payments or mortgage payments that need to be made? If the facility was purchased, we could assume that it was either a cash purchase or a forgivable loan, and there might not be a mortgage. It includes the level of service that we wanted to offer at the site and what the intention of the program was. So there are a wide range of things that go into what the actual operating costs will be, but we think that this range is reasonable given any number of choices.
So Hillary, I'm gonna stop you here because I think what we're gonna do is dive deeper into the framework at the next meeting.
Okay.
In part because I think this is gonna be a helpful base, but I think we've kind of given people a lot of information and a lot of really good information, but like I said, I think this one is one that would be good for us to start with, and also to make sure people see it in advance so that they can digest it a little better.
Understood.
Thank you. So Hillary, I know Hillary gave you a lot of information, and let me just say a couple things about what you just learned. Part of the reason that we're giving you so much background is that there's a big chunk of work that the commission or the committee, I'm sorry, could have been tasked with, but we really were tasked with one very specific issue. And that is how we're going to be addressing urgent needs relative to housing. And I'm gonna ask Hillary to put I think it's slide 39 back up for just a moment. There you go. So this is where this committee lives. The committee was established by really by one of our colleagues, by Supervisor Cortese, who wanted us to take a deep dive into this body of work. And so with that, I'm going to see if there are any questions from the committee, from our committee members on this issue. I'm going to ask you if you could use your blue hands if that's possible. And, you know, see if, I know that was a lot of information, give everybody a minute to go back and see if you have any notes that you're interested in reviewing. And I know Liz Lawler, Mayor Lawler, you want to start?
Sure, thank you. This has been a great presentation, and you're right, there's a lot of information, really good information here. I do have one quick question. A couple of years ago, I was at a fundraiser, and one of the panelists was a woman who had experienced homelessness in our county for 10 years. And she had talked about how the shelters, she could only be in a shelter for 60 days. And once she had attended a certain shelter, she could no longer go back to that shelter. And I wanted to confirm if that was the case, and if so, why is it that way? Is that something you can answer?
Sure, Hillary?
Yes. So over the past few years, we've made a lot of changes to how the shelters implement their work. And the majority of shelters in our community are aligned with the Continuum of Care's efforts and best practices. So most of the shelters now allow people to stay 24/7, have time limits that are based on people's need as much as possible, rather than limits because somebody somewhere in a contract told them arbitrarily that it was a limit. So I think that there's much less of that happening now, if at all, than there was before.
Okay, good, thank you.
Thank you. Mayor Klein?
Sure. So I'll talk about the overall task force later. Just several things with the slides. First, page 4, I think you were missing several cities. So for the point and count slides, Sunnyvale actually had one of the biggest increases of 147% in their numbers. And at least I think it's missing. Yes. And a lot of that was, I think, more accurate counting. So I'm happy to making sure that it's just up to date, because there was a lot of feedback within our community about what are we going to be doing about, you know, the homeless problems and what our solutions are. So I think that's important. And then just as a question, as far as transitional housing. So I was actually surprised from your numbers, and I'm not going to remember the exact pages, like 24 or 25, about the rate of maintaining permanent housing. Specifically for transitional housing was worse than rapid rehousing and homeless prevention. And so I was just trying to get a better idea from that, because I was seeing transitionary housing as finding housing for people that are now waiting to go into permanent housing, to have a much lower percentage of success for that specific group seemed odd in my case. And can you explain that a little bit?
Sure. First of all, I apologize for that first slide. It looks like the alphabet got cut off, which is terrible.
That's fine.
And with regard to transitional housing, I think that I think that what you are thinking of as transitional housing, we are calling interim housing. So,
okay.
And I will be the first to admit, way too much lingo. So interim housing is emergency shelter for people who have a housing subsidy and are just waiting for their unit to be ready. Transitional housing is a site-based model. So there's a facility that exists where people can live, usually for up to 2 years, in a pretty structured and supported environment. But the expectation is that after their time receiving the support and increasing their stability, they would move out of that program out to the rental market, usually without a subsidy. And so I think that the reason we see lower movement to permanent housing is that, one, we're still improving how we are matching people right to transitional housing, so that after they leave transitional housing, they can be successful and maintain housing. And also thinking about if we are implementing transitional housing the right way in our community. And so looking at this data point is something that concerns us too, and we're always trying to figure out how we do this better. But one of the biggest factors is saying to somebody, hey, you've been living in this affordable place for 2 years and you're pretty stable and it's really affordable, go find something else. And I think that that's one of the hardest challenges for people leaving transitional housing.
Okay, and that was my question. You know, it's like we have, you know, the Sunnyvale shelter on Ross, which used to be cold weather shelter, and now I was always calling it transitional housing, because the residents that are there are, from what I saw, waiting to be placed. And you know, that difference between interim and transitional, I think, isn't really captured. So okay, I have a better understanding now of how you're dealing with that. You know, I just want to upfront commend, you know, Cindy and you know, the rest of the Board of Supervisors for convening this task force. You know, this is a really critical issue, and I love the aspirational goals and to see what we can do, you know, in the next few months. So thanks.
Thank you, Mayor. Kelsey?
Hi, thank you. I was wondering if you have any sense in terms of trends. I know a lot of people are anticipating COVID precipitating a lot of people entering homelessness. And similarly with the fires, I wonder how many structures in Santa Clara County have been destroyed, and if there are people who are entering homelessness because of the fires.
Hillary, do you want to take a stab at that?
Sure.
on the fire, I think I can respond to, but on COVID-19.
Mm-hmm. We have definitely seen a significant increase in the demand for homelessness prevention services. And for example, we had a first round of increased homelessness prevention for people who were impacted by COVID directly in some way, either through loss of job or illness. And in the first 3 days of the interest list, received applications from, I believe, 6,600 households, and we had resources to serve 4,500 households. So we're definitely seeing an increase in homelessness prevention. I think a couple of things are going to continue to impact that. One is eventually the eviction moratoriums that have been put up by the county and the state will need to terminate, and even the current state plan to require 25% payments will impact people and their ability to stay housed, particularly if they haven't been able to regain income or employment since the start of COVID. So we do anticipate higher numbers, and that's taking an impact also, but are also trying to deploy our homelessness prevention resources and pull together as many homelessness prevention resources as we can, because it will be much harder. It'll be much harder to deal with the onslaught of homelessness if we don't put forth as much effort as possible into prevention now.
So, and Kelsey, I would just add 2 things. One, as it relates to the fires, I think we lost a little over 100 structures, and while we've had an impact to housing, most of that it appears that folks have found their way to manage that for themselves. So we haven't had a huge onslaught. I just want to reinforce something though that Hillary raised about COVID-19. I think part of the reason the county and many of the cities around the table have been so aggressive about the eviction moratoriums is that we recognize that absent making sure those moratoriums are in place, and frankly, the new changes that the state's made, allowing people to pay up to 25% of their rent and then not being evicted even post-COVID, we think are good tools that are going to help prevent homelessness. Now, one thing I think, and this isn't something that necessarily the task force will work on, but one thing that we may ask for your support and your advocacy is really looking for state and federal support as the months go on, in terms of being more proactive in terms of both protecting the landlords as well as the tenants, so that we don't have just a rush of homelessness that we're going to be dealing with. So more to come on that, and happy to give updates as we go through the process. All right, so we had Anthony. Go ahead, Kelsey.
I just had one more question, which was about the transitioning people from hotels to emergency shelters, and wondering whether people will be expected to go. I assume the hotels are non-congregate situations, and if the emergency shelters, if the plan there is to put people into congregate shelters while they're waiting, I'm just curious to hear more about that plan.
Hillary?
Yes, the move from motels would be to the City of San Jose's emergency interim housing. And so they would be non-congregate modular buildings. So each person who was in a hotel room would get their own space in a non-congregate setting.
I'm going to go to Anthony and then to Lisa. Anthony, you're on mute. If you're.
Hi, Hillary. In the 3 pillars you spoke of, the community plan moving forward, is there any mechanism planned or in place to hold the community partners speak to the fire as far as maybe policing or examining itself to ensure that there is uniformity among all of the different partners when it comes to.
Anthony, I'm so sorry. We're having a very difficult time hearing you. Do you want to try again?
Yeah, is there any mechanism in place or plan for the continuum of care to like hold its partners speak to the fire to be sure that there's a uniformity in the way that services are dispersed, not just to those seeking housing, but to those who are already housed?
Thank you. Hillary, did you hear that?
I did. So just to recap, and Anthony, maybe you can confirm if I got it right. I think that what you're asking is if the continuum of care, the COC, has any plan to hold its partners accountable for how they implement services in a uniform way, particularly for people who are currently housed and receiving services. Is that the gist of the question? Okay. So, definitely we would approach that in a few ways. One is that the county's Office of Supportive Housing staffs the continuum of care, and many of the contracts that we have for services are monitored by staff in our office. And I think that definitely we're taking a closer look at those contracts now than we have previously. This is a big year in terms of the county's procurement requirement timeframes being reached. And so there's opportunity in that as we look at who the county will partner with going forward in terms of contracts. I think that also we're working on how we can be a better partner in getting feedback from people with lived experience about how it's going. And I think that as we can unfold and unpack that in our office, that will be another way that we approach that, and then work with other funders in the community to do the same. I do want to just say, though, that while we had a lot of plans and ambitions 6 months ago, COVID has slowed us down in some areas just a little bit, and we're regaining our footing. Many of the people who would be doing that work now have been tasked with COVID response. And I think we're at that place again where we're going to be starting to do those things.
Thank you, Hillary. Lisa?
Hi, guys. Good evening. I had a question on the safe parking programs. Are those listed as temporary emergency housing, or are they appropriate for a place to be for someone who is eligible for supportive housing and just kind of waiting for the permanent supportive housing placements? Is that an appropriate place for safe parking, or are they, like, as far as the arbitrary, like you said, arbitrary time limits? I know that they do have a time limit of couple of the safe parking programs. And I'm wondering if those are just due to the COVID, where because there's moratorium, that there's really not to be any time limits, or because I'm aware of a few people that are there and they're high on the score on the VASPADOT and are just waiting for placement for permanent supportive housing, but are pressured with time limits and everything. So I'm just kind of a little confused on how that affects the safe parking programs. Are they considered temporary emergency housing? Do they fall under those guidelines, or do they fall under something else? And is that due to the COVID moratorium?
Most of the safe parking program, many of the safe parking programs are in fact governed by safe parking ordinances within a jurisdiction. So some of the programs that have time limits, for example, are because the ordinance specifies a period of review for permit to park in the safe parking spot, for example. And so the operator might connect with the safe parked household like every 30 days is one example that I can think of. Say, okay, it's time to renew your permit.
Right.
So they are intended not to be permanent. They're intended to be a
Right.
safe place off the streets where people can park. And I would say that it's, we've categorized it here on this slide, for example, as a temporary intervention, but it's not quite emergency shelter. They're very different.
Okay, so there's a gray area.
I think so. That's fair.
Yeah. Thanks, Lisa.
Okay, thank you.
Are there any other questions for the staff? Like I said, I know that's a lot of information, and we'll have another, obviously we'll get to talk about this, but, again, we'll send out the slides to everyone so that it gives you a chance to digest it. And we'll begin the next meeting with a discussion of the framework and then go to questions again so that people can really start to understand this a little bit better. I want to ask if staff could leave the slide up with our body of work on it. If you could go back to the focal point of the committee. And one thing, and I just want to say, people don't need to give us this tonight, and we will send out a draft of the work plan. But really where our sweet spot is going to be is what can we do quickly and to get as many people off the street as we can. The numbers are really significant, and we, I will just say, I think from for a long time, I think most of us have really been thinking about shelters. The county is relatively new to housing, by the way. We really didn't decide we were going to be in the housing business until about 2015, 2016. We, in the past, have had an Office of Supportive Housing, but that office was really intended to support efforts that we had writ large throughout the organization that dealt with housing. Once redevelopment went away, and it's sort of whose job was it, and it was impacting the county, and the county did the study that Hillary alluded to, it really started to get our thinking changing. We then went to the voters. After we had a task force like this, we went to the voters to get money for permanent supportive housing. We're coming back in this model because we really want to talk about what are the emergency strategies we can take. What I'd like to do, if it's okay with everybody, is send out a draft of the work plan, but with the idea that we're really focused on this, this strategy of addressing people who are unsheltered, doing it quickly, and improving people's quality of life as much as we can until we get people into permanent housing. Are there any thoughts or feedback folks want to give on that broad concept? No, that sounds like an okay kind of focus for us. Again, I know you had so much information. I'm sure you're just like, no more. Okay, good. All right. Well, then we'll start there. We'll send something out that reflects that framework. And then if I could, I want to go to the last item on here on this section. And it's really, Hillary, can you put up the last slide with the dates of the meetings on here? So these are this is the proposed work plan. Meeting dates for us. And I know it's sort of hard to, if folks can just take a look at their calendar, if we didn't send this out, we'll try to not have conflicts with meetings that you already have. We're doing these at different times and different dates because we want to make sure we can involve as much of the community as possible. So we didn't just choose like Wednesday middays or even just evenings, but this is the proposed schedule. Andy, did you want to give feedback to that?
I sent a message already to Scott, but Thursday, October 8th is the Cities Association meeting.
Okay.
And also, but I was going to go to the board and ask for it to be moved because it's also the League of California Cities annual event, which is all virtual. but I'm checking in with our board tomorrow to find out if it really is a conflict. So if it's not a conflict with the league, we'll have a meeting on the 8th. And our meetings would start at 6.
Okay. All right. We'll take a look at that date. Thank you. What I'd like to do is, I know we had a big discussion. I'm going to go to the public for any item that folks would like to speak on that is under item 3. And this includes the calendar. It includes the presentation that was just given by staff. And we have one public speaker, and I'll ask the clerk if they can call on that speaker.
Yes, and the timer. How much time would you like us to allow?
You want to go ahead and
2 items? 2 minutes, I'm sorry?
Yeah, thank you.
Perfect. And we'll allow a minute for the timer to be set. Our speaker is a caller whose number ends in 676. I am unmuting you. Please accept the unmute and you will have 2 minutes to speak. The timer will start when you begin speaking.
Could you unmute yourself?
Caller 676.
650. All right.
They seem to be experiencing some technical difficulties.
Yeah, that's unfortunate. Well, we're going to come back to the board. What I'd like to request is a motion and a second to receive the report, to allow us to send to you a draft agenda that we can vote on. I'm sorry, draft work plan that we can vote on and get feedback on at our next meeting, and to adopt the calendar with the exception of the last date, the 8th.
So moved.
I'll have a motion from Vice Mayor Nunez. And who was the second? I'm sorry.
Second.
From Mayor Klein. Thank you. We're so speedy there. So we have a motion and a second. Any discussion on the motion? Then I'm going to ask for a roll call vote.
Councilmember Bybee.
Aye.
Mayor Scharf.
Aye.
Councilmember Bracco. Mayor Pro Tem Martinez Beltran. Councilmember Sinks. Councilmember Dominguez. Vice Mayor Nunez.
Aye.
Mayor Lawler.
Yes.
Mayor Constantine.
Aye.
Councilmember Ramirez.
Yes.
I'm sorry, was that a yes?
Yes.
Thank you. Councilmember Perales.
Aye.
Councilmember Esparza. Councilmember O'Neill. Councilmember O'Neill, was that a yes?
Yes.
Thank you. Vice Mayor Smith. Mayor Klein.
Yes.
Thank you. Member Clark.
Yes.
Thank you. Member Reeve.
Aye.
Member Itari.
Aye.
Thank you. Member Baines.
Yes.
Member Franklin.
Yes.
Thank you. Member Sharp. Member Stepanov.
Yes.
Thank you. Member Cooper?
Yes.
Member Pham?
Yes.
Member King? Member Shaw?
Yes.
Great, thank you. That concludes our roll call vote.
Thank you. And I know we had a couple of folks who had a hard time getting off mute. So
okay, I can go through those that were missed.
That's all right. Anthony, did you want to vote on that? He's saying yes, but he's having a hard time unmuting. And Mayor Pro Tem Yvonne Beltran.
Perfect, got him. Yeah. Thank you.
Anthony?
Yes.
He said yes. All right, there we go.
Yes.
And Mayor Pro Tem, thank you. Thanks all of you. And I know that passed unanimously. We're now going to go to the last item on our agenda, which is public comment. And then after public comment, I just want to make a few next steps comments. So do we have any member of the public that would like to speak to an item that is not on the agenda, but within the purview of the committee? I see no hands raised. I want to say, just first of all, thank you. I know this was a very dense meeting. We're going to get you the slides and we're going to get you a draft of the work plan. And we'll also get an updated calendar. So we'll send out the calendar with the exception of the last meeting. And then we'll vote on that last meeting at our next meeting. I really want to say a very special thank you both for signing up. I should say we had a lot of people interested in being on the committee, and I mean really a lot of folks. And so we were trying to bring together a group of folks from all over the county that have different perspectives, but with an eye toward being able to come up with some solutions that we could present both to the Board of Supervisors, but my hope is to each of your boards in each of your communities as well. So with that, I want to say thank you. We ended an hour early. I will never guarantee that will happen again. So I want you to run with reckless abandon with the hour you have back. And what we'll do is make sure we get materials out a little bit sooner. I do want to just mention that I realized that we did not send a link out to the materials for tonight. We will send a meeting link out next time, so you won't have to search. And I apologize for that. We'll try to make it much easier next time we meet. So with that, I want to say everybody be safe, be well, wear your mask, wash your hands, don't touch your face. All right, thanks everyone. Have a good night.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You too.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Good night.
Thank you.
Thank you.